Good morning, everyone. I want to confirm that my slides are visible.
Yes, there.
Awesome, awesome. So once again, good morning. My name is Aaron Brown. I am going to present today on the price of precision, the risk and rewards of GPS in the age of navigation warfare. So we're going to start with the agenda, right? Want to know exactly what we're going to cover today. It's going to be pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Really what it's going to do is this topic, this seminar that I'm presenting this morning is just going to cover an article that I wrote very recently on GPS, on navigation warfare, and the overlap that it plays in the Department of Defense and in society. So I'm going to cover it pretty generally. If there's any questions, I would just ask that they be saved to the end. It's a really exciting topic. I most recently got involved into operational law, and navigation warfare became one of the things that I learned most about. And so I'm really excited to share these principles and some of the things I've learned. And I'm hoping ultimately that what it'll do in the future is open up a conversation so that it's really emphasizing the need for us to kind of move forward with strengthening our fight in the navigation warfare front. So going back to the agenda, the things that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to do a little brief introduction, kind of go over kind of some of the things we're going to talk about and set the stage, right? It's incredibly important to set the stage so we know exactly kind of what navigation warfare means, especially to individuals who may not have an understanding of what navigation warfare means, don't kind of understand, how the Department of Defense plays a role in that. So we'll cover that up pretty generally as well. Then we'll go into the fundamentals of GPS. I thought I had a good understanding of what GPS is and how it works. And I really couldn't even scratch the surface until I did the research and put this paper together. So I'm kind of excited to share a little bit about that. So you have kind of a baseline understanding of GPS and its applications and kind of at its core level, how it works. Then we'll jump into the tenets of navigation warfare. And from there, I'll explain, why navigation warfare is so incredibly important and why the Department of Defense should develop tenets or maybe adopt the tenets that I presented in order to determine the best practices and ways to combat navigation warfare. From then, we'll transition into the concerns within the DoD, right? We'll talk about two main principles, electromagnetic intrusion, and then GPS jamming, right? What those two things are, why the Department of Defense cares about those two things, why society should care about those two things, and then they kind of build on why those tenets of navigation warfare are so incredibly important. From then, we'll transition real briefly into some real world consequences, how this plays out in real world. I'll then transition into techniques, tactics, and procedures. These are what we call in the military TTPs. And what we'll do is we'll kind of explain some things I think that the DoD could implement to strengthen our fight in the navigation warfare construct. I'll round it out with the benefits of legal counsel, and then we'll conclude and just basically leave with some takeaway points that I put inside of my article that I've also summarized here in the presentation. A little bit about me. Very generally, I am currently a captain in the United States Army. I'm serving at Fort Shafter here in Hawaii, beautiful Hawaii. It's presently 5:30 in the morning, so please excuse me if I'm lagging a little bit. So education, I went to Florida A&M for law school and graduated from University of Central Florida for my undergrad. Previous experience, I didn't always work in space law, right? I didn't always focus on this type of stuff. Before this, I was doing contract fiscal, government acquisitions in Central Texas. Prior to that, I did criminal defense in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, one of the busiest jurisdictions in the world for the military. Prior to that, I was advising commanders at a recruiting brigade in Alabama. And then I started off doing operational and administrative law at Fort Hood. I'm a licensed attorney for the Florida Bar, and I've had some previous civilian law experience, but not relevant to what we're talking about today. I do want to highlight my disclaimer here at the bottom. I want to make sure I say that the views presented that I'm going to give today don't necessarily represent the DoD or any of its components, but these are my thoughts and these are things that I wanted to share with you all. So let's move on. I'm going to go into the introduction. Now, bear with me. I want to read you this scenario as I think it's so relevant into what we're talking about here today. So consider the scenario, right? You're a senior military leader at Fort Shafter in Hawaii, beautiful Hawaii. The base that you're located on is relatively small, but it's a few miles away from one of the most world's visited beaches, Waikiki. I'm sure we all have heard of that. You've just stepped away from the office for lunch, and as you drive down a local road, traffic begins to pick up, and you notice several traffic lights flickering erratically. You begin to hear distorted radio broadcasts from your car stereo, and what happens next is pretty alarming. The faint broadcast warns of imminent chaos. The electric and water grids are malfunctioning. The 911 dispatch system is down. Pilots are unable to communicate with air traffic control, and global air defense systems are no longer functioning. Following this news, you shift your car back into drive and you immediately turn back and head to the base. But you're forced to use landmarks, right? Because your global positioning system, your Navstar GPS doesn't work, right? This is but a simple set of facts that could quite possibly happen if we face some sort of intrusion to our GPS and navigation warfare, our GPS systems. So with that background in mind, I just ask that you keep that in mind as we move forward. We'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals of GPS, or global positioning system. So what are the basics, right? And again, we're going to go very, very high level overview. We're talking 30,000 feet. We're up there. At its core level, the GPS system has just three main components. It's the space-based component, which commonly understood as the satellites, its receivers, and then it's the command and control centers, right? So the United States government, as you see in this slide, we have the capability based on the constellations that we have currently in space to have 24 hours a day coverage at all times, day and night, right? It's a great thing. And the way we do it is the satellites that we have in constellation, the way that they're orbiting, it gives us the persistent coverage that we need to order to have those communications in that contract, that telemetry with those satellites at all times. So if you look down, I'm in my fourth or fifth bullet here, the GPS satellite itself is going to circle that constellation in and of itself, circles the Earth multiple times a day. And those satellites are transmitting that data to the ground components, to those components here on Earth, so that we can receive that information and be able to basically have precise location data at all times. So I won't go into the specifics of it, but the slide here that I have here, the image over here, kind of explains how that works. It's a concept called trilateration that kind of uses that information from the satellites to bounce down to Earth. But again, at its core principles, you're really just looking at three main components, right? Space-based, what is that? That's our satellites. We then have our receivers, which you can think of as your Garmin or something that's taking the data. And then we have the command and control centers. Those are the ones that are processing that raw data as it comes in. So application, right? Technology is incredibly advanced at this point, and you know, this slide may be outdated in a few months, right? Our civilian-based applications are extremely and incredibly accurate. I'm talking within 5 meters, right? And that's extremely and significantly important for both civilians and for military-based applications. And for our military-based applications, we even have much more higher accuracy when we're talking about some of the things that we're operating with, even down as being close to within 2 centimeters. So I'll make sure to highlight there. So civilian-based applications, military-based applications, extremely important for us to rely on that accuracy, right? And before I got into GPS, before I even understood what navigation warfare was, I didn't understand the role that GPS plays in a lot of the applications that we use worldwide, right? I had no idea that banking and financial market systems are reliant on some of the time synchronization that is applicable to some of our GPS-based capabilities. Grids such as power, water, traffic signals, like we talked about in our introduction, all reliant on that synchronization capability that we have based on our GPS systems. Again, air traffic control, even our environmental applications, all are uniquely tied to GPS-based applications. So again, when you go back to the introduction, we talk about some sort of electronic warfare or something that impedes our ability to use that system. Think about some of the applications or networks that could possibly be intruded as a result of that, and how that can impact not just the military, but our civilian way of life as well. And we talked a little bit about this. I won't go into detail, but again, one of the components is the command and control, right? And luckily, we have some awesome service members who are equipped with the tools, the knowledge, education to monitor these systems and these command and control stations. They do a lot of the things that I listed in the bullets here. And like I said at the bottom, they play a pivotal role in kind of controlling the health and welfare of our satellite constellations, receiving that data, and making sure that they're monitoring at all time. So navigation warfare, what does that even mean? What are we talking about here? And what are those principles that we're going to be mentioning a little bit later? Well, let's get into it. So Joint Publication 3-14 covers space operations. And for the military, basically what we're talking about here is deliberate, right? Offensive and defensive actions to ensure friendly use and prevent adversary use of our position, navigation, and timing, better known as PNT, information through coordinated employment of space, cyberspace, and electromagnetic warfare capabilities. What we're talking about here is attacks on our ability to use freely our networks, right? And so that's what navigation warfare is, a constant battle and fight against that. So based on my research, it is clear that the Department of Defense or the joint publications are encouraging the DoD to adopt a core set of principles to combat navigation warfare, right? To have a unity of effort in our fight against navigation warfare. And I think it is incumbent on us to understand that it's not just the Department of Defense, right? We're talking about civilian-based applications as well. And we'll get into that a little bit, but it's important that we explain that there's an overlap, right? If our civilian-based applications, if our military-based applications are impeded, the civilian-based applications could very well be impeded as well. So we want to make sure that we understand that it's not just a military brief today, right? It's an impact on civilian-based applications as well. And as we discussed in our previous slide, GPS is critical, not just for driving your vehicle and be able to know, how to get to the nearest Walgreens, right? It's critical for operations, and it can have severe consequences if military-based applications are impeded. One thing I did learn is that the signal itself from the satellites down to the ground stations aren't incredibly strong, right? So they are susceptible to jamming. And additionally, what I've learned in research is that it's not incredibly difficult to build systems that our adversaries use to jam or to create some sort of intrusion into our networks. So with that in mind, it's important that the DoD come up with some principles so that we can kind of collaborate and ensure that we're working together to combat the signal disruption. And as you see here at the bottom here, I did list some things that I highlight a little bit more in my article. And we'll get into the principles or the tenets that I listed, but it's also important that I highlighted in my article is that, in addition to having some sort of unity of efforts, it needs to go up and down the chain, right? We're talking, there needs to be additional government funding for space-related technologies so that we can continue to maintain our readiness and increase our knowledge base on ways to combat EW intrusion. So in addition to that, I think that in addition to funding, right, you're going to need some sort of legislative support with that in mind. So I think it's important that we all have a unity of effort and have a core set of principles or tenets so that this support can come up and down the chain. So what are those principles, right? I think that I wanted to make it simple, right? And I think that 3 core principles could be implemented to support this type of initiative: safeguard, intercept, preserve. Safeguard, right? We understand, and at the lowest level, that we need to protect personnel and friendly forces from GPS disruption, right? By implementing the safeguard tenet, in addition to using education tools and making sure that we're continually understanding our systems at all time, we can minimize the likelihood of disruption. And in my article, I discuss ways that service members can work to safeguard their systems by having a core level understanding of their systems, whether it be their GPS-based applications to navigate their vehicles or any other application that they have, understanding it up and down, right? Knowing how proper encryption works and ensuring that they're doing their due diligence, they can safeguard their systems and minimize the impact of an adversary trying to create some sort of intrusion into their system. Intercept, right, is we want to intercept as much as we possibly can. And we got to echo that down to the lowest echelons of our forces in the military, right? We want to prevent hostile forces from using techniques with minimal effect. So if they're going to do it, and we know they're going to do it, right? We're aware and cognizant that EW intrusions are happening all the time. We want to make sure that our systems and our service members know what to do to minimize the impact, right? Have secondary protocols, have ways to, if they are intruded, know how to overcome that level of intrusion. And to preserve, right? The last tenet that I think is incredibly important to our civilian-based population is we want to make sure that we ensure the civilian use of GPS system is not inhibited, right? We want to make sure that we protect and preserve their use of the application to the greatest extent that we possibly can as well. All right, so why does the DoD care, right? What's the DoD's part in here, right? So the DoD has several concerns, and I'm sure it's pretty understood with navigation warfare and the impact that it can play on our service members in the military. So there's two types of techniques that are commonly understood to play a role in the electronic warfare construct, right? We're talking denial tactics and deception tactics. And they're simply what they sound like, the name suggests, right? Denial tactics is what our adversaries are going to use to prevent our systems from receiving that data from the satellite, right? Just putting a shield up, blocking it so that we aren't really able to communicate on an electromagnetic spectrum like we should and we want to, right? Deception is a little bit more sophisticated, right? So we're talking about confusing patterns or sending mixed signals to our system so that we're not able to really decipher or interpret the data, right? So those two tactics, and I won't go into too much detail, are the two main reasons why the Department of Defense is concerned with electronic warfare, and why we need to ensure that we have proper tenets in place to combat that warfare and ensure our service members are ready to use those tenets and apply what they know to overcome this type of intrusion. And in addition to that, right, we're talking EM attacks can also include jamming and also some sort of electromagnetic intrusion as well. And I go into that a little bit in the bullets, but more detail in the article itself. And last bullet there is just a kind of another one that we just want to bring home and echo at all echelons is vigilance, education, awareness. Those are essential principles as well to combat those threats effectively. So in addition to the tenets, right, I also highlight some TTPs, right? Some things that are just some simple core little nuggets that all service members should know and ways that they can use to utilize to combat EMI and GPS jamming. So 4 different ones, right? Here are the TTPs that I propose in my article that we can use or suggest to use to combat those intrusions, right? We're talking anticipation, continuous observation, encryption, and reporting. Anticipation, we talked about that a little earlier, right? We can already anticipate that our adversaries are going to try to intrude or jam our systems, right? It's an evolving battle space, but we know that that's going to happen. So with that anticipation in mind, with that thought and knowledge that they're going to try to do that in mind, let's anticipate and be prepared. How do we do that? Continuous observation. We should be continually monitoring our environment, our operational environment, and preparing alternate means of communication. We need to have secondary considerations in place if something were to impact our ability to use some sort of software or system. Third is encryption. We need to emphasize the importance at all levels of encrypting GPS-based systems to protect against potential disruption. And I know that sounds as easy as it reads, but it's just as simple as locking your door when you leave your vehicle, right? We just sometimes overlook that small step, but it's such a significant step and some a barrier that we can put in place from allowing our adversaries to use or intrude against our systems. And then reporting. Um, During my research, I found that there are mechanisms in place to report these types of intrusions if and when they do occur. And I didn't really understand the significance of that, but now I do, right? It's so important for us to memorialize those intrusions so that we can build a system to overcome them in the future. So whether it's a small intrusion or a large scale intrusion, it's so important that we service members follow those systems or those steps in place to combat that threat in the future and make sure that we're kind of on the same page and that we're logging that data. So benefits of legal counsel. Why am I here? Why is some sort of attorney talking about navigational warfare tenets? Shouldn't some sort of a commander be discussing this or kind of covering these principles? Well, it's as simple as this. Your attorney is there to help solve complex problems, right? And I kind of highlighted here on this page. I could go on and on and on about the benefits of legal counsel, but at its core level, we are there to help plan, identify issues, and advise senior leaders on the rules of engagement. And we also assist with mitigating conflicts. It's so incredibly important for a judge advocate, whether you're in the military or some sort of counsel in the civilian arena, to be involved at all stages of this type of warfare. Every authority that I read emphasized the need for counsel, emphasized the significance of judge advocates or attorneys being present. So it's just one reason that it's so important for me as an attorney to brief this, because there's so many unique legal considerations involved. And I'm just so glad that I'm able to learn a little bit more about it now and emphasize it more in my article. A little quote from Walt Disney there. And so what do we do? How do we get started, right? How do we resolve this? So the call to action is simple. Proactivity includes education. And I think I mentioned that in several different ways throughout this presentation. We got to make sure that we're educated, everyone, all service members up and down the chain, on their systems, what navigation warfare means. We need to have some sort of unity of effort with tenets and principles so that we're all collectively working together to combat navigation warfare. We got to make sure that we defend GPS. We know it's going to happen. We just need to be prepared. And lastly, we need to stand up various EMI GPS operation centers, right? They are going to be the centers that protect the effective use of military and civilian-based use of GPS systems. So we have a joint navigation warfare center construct. It's a single asset, but I think that we need to broaden that and create more components that can support in this navigation warfare construct. So the take home point, it's indispensable. We got to have it, right? You know, can you imagine a world, and maybe some of you can, where we don't have GPS, right? It's critical in almost all aspects of modern life: applications, mapping, navigation, operations, synchronizations, weapon systems. All grids operate on the GPS system. So we need to prioritize navigation warfare, include and emphasize the tenets and principles, and work together so that we can have mission success on all domains in the navigation warfare construct. All right, kind of ran through that pretty quickly. That's my contact information if anyone wants to take that down. I will open the floor for any questions. I know we have maybe a few different minutes, so please share with me your thoughts or any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, please type your questions in the chat or Q&A section. We have 5 more minutes. We have something. Okay, Aaron, if you can summarize it out loud briefly and then answer it. Aaron, we cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, but if you can summarize the question, we didn't hear that.
With demonstrated effects of interference with GPS signals, what roles might emergent technologies like those being developed by DARPA for military use in GPS restricted environments play in future of civilian navigation? I mean, I think it's technological strides are only going to continue to improve our way of life. I don't know significantly much about the program, but with that technology in conjunction with some of the things that we have developing now, I mean, it's only going to progress us light years ahead of where we are today. Technology is continually advancing, and I'm excited to see kind of, Chris, where that's going to head for us. There's another question in here. I was trying to get to it real quick. While law is important, how does the U.S. respond to attacks against our GPS infrastructure by countries such as China, Russia, that don't care about our laws or international legal norms? Yeah, that's a great question as well. So the DoD on this level, on this type of environment that I can actually speak on, like I put in my slides, I mean, we're actively engaged in some of our joint authorities are cognizant of those impacts that our adversaries, like those that you mentioned, are trying to take on us. So we're actively finding ways to combat those threats, giving authorities to our DoD senior leaders so that if and when we do have an intrusion, with the assistance of legal counsel, we can take the necessary steps to respond effectively and credibly to those threats. Thank you again for that question.
Thank you, Aaron. If there are any more questions, we have 2 more minutes, so now is the time to type them.
Chris, with the lack of concise cyberware for electronic warfare rules of war, where do you see the legal field heading for GPS and navigation attacks? It's a great question. So we do have rules of engagement that I can speak on Unclass for those type of electronic warfare attacks. So there are rules of engagement that the Department of Defense is cognizant of, and they are tracking. And the way ahead is just continue to be more vigilant, right? Increase our system capabilities, increase our knowledge of those attacks, continue to press forward with a unity of efforts on all fronts so that we can strengthen our systems and to credibly attack those threats in the near future. And that's kind of on this level as much as I can really get into regarding that. A great question. Last question real quick about geographic literacy and awareness without GPS due to our heavy dependency. Yeah, no, that's what this article is all about, really just explaining how significant GPS plays in not just the Department of Defense, but all our applications. So I hope you get a chance to take a look at my article. It's listed under my page, and I hope to get your thoughts on that. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you everyone for asking questions. This is the end of this session, but we have more panels going on throughout the day, so you can check our program on the website and join other sessions. And thank you again, Aaron. And I'm going to end the session. Bye-bye.